I am Dracula.
Good morning, Vietnam!
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
I feel the need for speed.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads. Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Batman.
Hello and welcome to the latest Moviescramble podcast. We are so excited to announce this special edition episode, of which there will be many throughout the year, where we revisit the original Universal Monsters universe. This is a project that we have talked about for a long time, and I am very excited that we are kicking this off. So in this episode of our Universal Monsters box set, as I have officially christened it, we are going to explore Todd Browning's 1931 Dracula starring Bela Lugosi and Luc Besson's 2025 Dracula, A Love Tale starring Caleb Landry Jones. Dracula is perhaps the most famous vampire of all, so it will be really interesting to see how he has evolved over the course of film history itself. But in order to sink my teeth into some vampire lore, I am going to need an unwilling assistant. So here he is, my own wee Renfield. It's John. John, how are you?
I'm good, yeah. More Renfield before the madness, because I tend to brush my hair a wee bit. But yes, apart from that, yeah, very good, yes. So how are you doing? Are you looking forward to this? I
think this is the most excited I have ever been to record a podcast.
Well, it's no bad thing, let's face it.
No, I just really love these films. So I'm really happy that we're kicking this off. And I love the fact that we're looking at the contemporary equivalents as well. So it's like, I feel like it gives you a real sense of where cinema has moved.
Yeah, and obviously it's interesting doing the comparison. And we're going to be doing that for all of the Universal Monsters ones. We'll do a modern one, a modern equivalent, if you like. And there are some pretty out there modern equivalents of some of these films as well. So that will be particularly interesting as well. So yes, looking forward to it. As with you, I've been looking forward to this for a while because the Universal box set has been sitting on my shelf for a good number of years now. And I've watched a few of the films and everything, when I actually got it on Blu-ray. It's a very nice Blu-ray presentation box and everything, but just getting the chance to talk about them as well is obviously good. So yeah. Oh, very nice.
Exciting. So we will start with the 1931 Dracula. So Todd Browning's film is widely regarded to be the film that kicked off the horror genre in Hollywood, although we had already seen vampires in films such as Nosferatu in 1922, for which we also have a podcast episode if you want to check that out. We just hadn't ever seen this particular iteration of the Eastern European Count on screen. So Bela Lugosi famously never blinks and gives us a castle-dwelling sophisticate, a man who is only too willing to feed and entertain whoever should darken his door. The film opens with music from the second act of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, lending both drama and danger to proceedings. The plot is relatively faithful to Bram Stoker's novel, and the cast includes the likes of Helen Chandler as Mina, David Manners as John Harker, Edward Van Sloan as Van Helsing, and of course the remarkable Dwight Fry as Renfield. So Bela Lugosi's portrayal of Dracula is obviously iconic, but what is it about this portrayal that sort of cemented him as the definitive screen vampire for you and for the sort of critics as well?
For a lot of the positives that come out of the Dracula lore and everything that has been brought to screen, it's actually some of his flaws that actually make it. The fact that he was not overly confident speaking English. He did some of his performances, especially on stage prior to that, he learned the lines phonetically. The same way that Antonio Banderas did for the Mambo Kings. He couldn't speak English proper, so he learned everything phonetically for that. But it's the same idea. So it gave the performance a different edge because he was very precise in his delivery, and because he had concentrated so much and learned all that, he could concentrate on the way that he actually put the performance across in such a way that it was really kind of startling kind of stark, and it was all about what he wasn't doing. He wasn't moving, like you say, he wasn't blinking, things like that.
Yeah.
And that kind of set the template for Dracula going forward. And it happens quite a lot, that it's actually the things that you don't have so much control over actually help with performances in films and all that, because they're overcoming certain barriers, so therefore they're really ultra confident. And you've got to remember that he actually did this on stage as well, so he was very familiar with the character and how the character moved, and he was able to hone that over a number. I mean, it was hundreds of performances he actually gave on stage, so he was able to hone the character to a certain edge. Obviously, it would be very stagey, and he was able to adapt that for the films, but a lot of early films, especially the talkies, were very stagey anyway.
Yeah.
So
this feels like a stage play at times, this film.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, it was actually, I know you said that it was quite faithful to the book, but they actually
It is
got the rights to
adapted
the stage
from
play,
the
so it was adapted from the stage
yeah.
play. So in order to keep the runtime down and to eliminate certain elements. Well, the book itself is based on journals and notebooks and internal monologues and things like that. So that's very difficult to actually put on screen. It's doable. And apparently there's cowboys and things like that in the novel. I haven't read the novel. So yes, rather than do that, they did an adaptation from the stage play, which kind of makes sense because they were wanting to get product out there, and there was a whole thing about Universal at the time being a small studio and all that. So yes, but yeah, the performance obviously was a revelation at the time because people hadn't really seen English language horror films to that same sort of extent, and they wouldn't have seen somebody like Lugosi in his performance. So it would have been a real sort of startling change to what they were used to. And you've got to remember, this is the infancy of sound. It's only been around for 2 years, so the way that he talks would be very unfamiliar with his sort of heavily accented European Hungarian. He's Hungarian, so it's that kind of Hungarian accent he's got, and it would be like nothing that people had ever heard of at the time. So yeah, it would have made a hell of an impact.
Yeah, I believe he has what the kids call riz. Like there's just there's a power about him, and I think a lot of that does come from the stillness as well. Like a lot of the time the camera moves towards him, he doesn't move towards the camera or the character that he is, talking to. So that stature, that movement of that lack of movement rather, in order to fill a frame, I just think is fantastic. And his stare is obviously completely mesmerizing. That was achieved through 2 pencil spotlights, which were shone directly onto his eyes. And there's the scene sort of towards, I would say about 2/3 of the way into the film, where he faces Van Helsing, and the two men are, kind of opposite ends of the room, and he just goes, "Come here." And it's a really clear command. And I've seen this film a million times. I hold my breath every time he does that, because he just moves his hand out in this claw, and it's such a command. Like, it's not just a command, it's like everything in his body, everything in his voice is just so powerful. And yeah, I think that the polish of the character as well, like as I've said, he's a sophisticated man. He drinks wine, he has the little medal on, he's suited and booted, and he's very sort of charming. I think that has definitely informed a lot of the vampires that we see on screen, because essentially what has happened with the vampire genre is it's become very sort of erotic and sexualized. And I think you find that in the fact that, he was other, he was exotic, he had a thick accent, he was very charming, he had dark, good looks. That in itself would have been very sexy for your average sort of, white American cinema viewer, because he was something that they hadn't seen before, I guess, as well. And we also have Dwight Fry's Renfield in this film, which is sort of manic in the intensity of the performance. How do you think Fry has shaped the archetype, I guess, of the mad henchman, and why do you think he became typecast afterwards?
He has taken that role and literally gone mad. You could almost think that he was mad in the sort of second half of the film, and it's got to do with the way that he portrayed sort of sane Renfield and then under the influence of the Count, because when at first he is not meek, but he's quite quiet when he's in the journey going towards the inn at the very start. He doesn't say he speaks to the woman across from him, who is the niece of the producer, I think.
Yes, I have Carla
Yeah.
Mel. Yeah.
And she's credited with speaking the first lines in a
Yeah.
horror film.
The original Ghetto Baby.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, yeah. So he comes across as being very sort of buttoned down and almost quite naive, because he's told, "Don't, you're going to see who, and they're saying, no, just wait until tomorrow, and he said, no, I have to go tonight. I have to go up and see the Count, have business with him." So he's very naive. So even when he gets in the carriage and it's the bat driving the carriage and everything like that.
It. Bats on strings.
Yeah. At no point does he think, I think I might leg it here. It's very sort of naive in a way. He's obviously thinking about the business aspect of it, because he's basically a stage, and that's what it comes down to in this film, and that's kind of true to the character as well. But yet, obviously, when he gets to the castle and basically shit happens, and he gets partially turned, only to the point where it completely changes his personality. He becomes a devotee of the Count. He will do anything for him. He calls him master all the time. It's always master, 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 everything he's saying about him. And he becomes this, well, they portray him as being wildly unkempt by the fact that his hair's a bit all over the place and he doesn't wear a tie. He's still wearing a suit. But it's a bit grubbier. It's a dark suit as well that he's wearing. And that's never explained how he managed to change from his nice pinstripe that he was wearing, his light pinstripe, which he was wearing when he actually met the Count in the first place. But yeah, it's when you see the transformation when they're on the ship and they open up the cargo hold and the light shines on him.
Oh, that's one of my favourite shots of this film.
Yeah, and he's just he's wild-eyed. That's what it's all about. And you can just tell that he is kind of lost something about himself. It could be to do with inhibitions, because that's part of the whole Dracula lore as well. It makes, like you say, it makes people more like there's a sexiness to people when they turn, because they have less inhibitions. They're more about indulgence, and indulgence in this sort of instance is like drinking blood from other people and things like that. But there's a whole, like I said, erotic thing around that. So he doesn't quite go there in that respect. He goes more sort of what has become a sort of typical madman who howls at the moon kind of idea, and that plays a wee bit into the whole lore as well, because there's a whole thing about like the undead being able to transform, in this case bats, but for a while it was wolves and dogs and things like that they could transfer into. So there's that whole thing as well. And there's a certain unhinged aspect about him, like when he's caught listening outside the door, and he's deadly serious because he's listening on behalf of his master so he can inform him. But then when they open the door and find him, he suddenly just goes back into mad again. So it's very sort of, he can control it and everything as well. And that is again a kind of a prototype for sort of madness on screen. And because of that, like you say, he was typecast after that into these kind of roles. It's because he was so good at that. That what happens is, especially in film and television, if you do a role, such an iconic role, well, then others are going to come to you with the same sort of eye. You're going to get inundated with this kind of thing. And you see it time and time again. And that's why, like for instance, like Robert Pattinson turned down vampire roles and undead roles. And he went completely away from that. He went into indie cinema and started working with like David Cronenberg and things like that. Very, very different stuff, because he would have been typecast in that kind of thing. And it's diminishing returns, which is a real shame, because obviously he's a very good actor. And the part of Renfield is a very good showcase for him, but he wasn't able to develop from there. And it is a shame if all you're getting offered is those roles, then if nothing else, you're going to take them. And we see this a couple of times from this film. With the kind of roles that people were taking as well. I'm sure we'll talk about that later on. But yes, it's It was an interesting role, and it was a very good portrayal. But it's a bit of a shame what happened to him afterwards.
Yes, it's almost like he was too good at his job, essentially. We've mentioned there that the film is sort of rooted in its stage play origins, and I feel like at times you can definitely tell this is a film that comes from a stage play. Did you feel that dated the film slightly or took you out of it in any way? Because it does feel very sort of like proscenium arch, address the audience, you stand on the left and I'll stand on the right at times. Did that sort of take you out of it, or did you just feel kind of swept up in the whole sort of like, this is the first horror?
Yeah, you get into the way that the film actually works. You get into the story pulls you in. So the way that it's presented, yes, it is stagey, but a lot of films round about that time it was the style of it, because they were basically adapting something from the stage. So why would they, add in lots of elements and actually shoot it on location when they can shoot it on sound stages? And you've got to remember, this was only 2 years after the Wall Street crash. So film companies obviously felt the pressure monetary from that as well. So they were very wary about spending lots and lots of money on a production that would involve sort of external shots and things like that. There's a wee bit of that, but not very much. And it's all to do with money, because the original idea behind doing Dracula was to do a very faithful adaptation of the book. And basically the guy in charge of Universal wanted to do that for something like 15 years. It was one of the first things that he wanted to do, and he wanted to do it during the silent era, but it didn't actually happen. And it's all got to do with money and confidence that you're actually going to make the money back, because you don't know a lot of the time how, especially with something like a horror film that has not really been, the US audiences at the time hadn't really had horror films with people speaking. Yes, they would have access to like silent films, but it's a different realm again when you are putting a sort of reasonable budget film up there and expecting people to come out for a horror film. And you can see that today as well.
I was going to say, nothing's changed.
Yeah, it's still regarded in the same way. But I mean, did it take you out of it, or did you just?
No, I think it's one of these films where if you kind of know what you're getting yourself in for, and you have that context of early cinema, early sound. I can imagine though, if you showed, I don't know, maybe like a 17-year-old or something, this film now, they wouldn't find it scary per se.
Oh, no, definitely.
But I think
not.
you can definitely appreciate, as I say, the art that has gone into this film and creating this character, and also sort of setting up the lore, as it were, because this film uses a lot of vampire tropes, obviously, as I say, taken from the novel, but we still see them today. So no reflection, the mention of garlic, the stake through the heart, the hissing at crucifixes. I love seeing all this in its infancy, because it's like establishing, as I say, these like sort of lores and tropes that still last today. And I think that's just so incredible when you see all of that. Like, I love the trick with the mirror in particular in this film, the little jewellery box. Like, was there anything that you thought, oh, that's so cool how they've established that particular piece of lore?
Yeah, well, I particularly like the use of wolfsbane as something that they were hanging it over like doors and things like that, and actually over door handles to stop it. And it was completely useless, because all we would do was basically take over the mind of somebody and tell them what to do and get rid of it. So it did, and then they would leave people alone.
Unguarded, I know.
Yeah, they wouldn't do. Yeah. So yeah, but I liked that. The mirror thing was particularly good, because that was very well done. It was a nice visual shot there. And because we're looking back on this, having nearly a century of films that have involved monsters and vampires. So like you say, the lore and the rules of the game are set up, and you can see how they've been set up and why they've been set up. It doesn't make particular sense, like the cross thing, because that doesn't, I mean, why a cross? Why? I know it's a religious thing and it's like God and everything, and that will be something that is explained in the second film that we talk about when we talk about it later. When it's more involved there, but it's just something that you take. Yeah, there are things that vampires don't like the daylight, for instance.
Yes.
They have to operate at night and things like that. So that obviously adds to all of the elements of it as well. And I particularly like the fact that when he was talking about moving to the Abbey, and he said, "Oh, I brought all these luggage labels. I hope it's enough." And he says, "Well, I'm only taking 3 boxes."
Yeah.
So, and it's 3 boxes full of dirt that you can actually
Yeah.
sleep in as well. Which
Yeah.
I thought that was, I like that aspect. I've always liked that about the sort of the vampire thing, that they have to sleep in the soil of their own
Yes.
place where they were born, or where they were brought up, or that kind of thing, the sort of native soil. I think that's a really nice touch about it. Obviously, the downside of that is they never come out dirty from the coffins. They're all made up.
He's immaculate at all times. Yeah. I think it does a good job, as you say, laying out the rules of the game is a perfect way of putting it. And I feel like it does a really good job of not over-explaining it either, because although this is early cinema audiences, it's not treating you like you're stupid. It is just expecting you to go along with the story.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yes. You're told this happens because of this, like a cross or whatever. And it's just left there. They don't need to backstory anything of that. And it's the same with Dracula. In the film there, you don't get backstory. He's a vampire, and he's been around for, they say he's been around for 100 years, but different stories tell different sort of interpretations of it. But yes, and it's just, you're just told he's a vampire, he needs blood to live, and this is what he does to do it. He influences people and to do it, and it's just left at that, which is good, because like obviously the film is very short, so you're not going to get that sort of whole backstory. You're not going to get Dracula Untold, for instance. It's, which is basically the whole of how he did become Dracula. So it's really, really well done in that way, and there's a certain amount of intelligence needed by the audience, sort of cinematic intelligence, in order to just go with and say, right, this is a rule, fine, so whatever happens because of that rule, I understand it. I don't need to know everything that happened before. Maybe that's, and that's the kind of thing that has been expanded on, because it can be just as interesting as the main story if it's done well. So but I like that. What about yourself?
Yeah, I definitely think that it's a film that places a lot of faith in its audience. It just expects you to go along with what it's setting out to you, and like you said, you don't need the backstory. He feels already like a well-established character, from the minute we first meet him, and I think a lot of it does come down to that power of presence as well of Bela Lugosi himself. But I think it's a film that places its faith. Also, we have to understand the context that there's an assumption that a lot of people will have read the book as well, pre-cinema, or pre the accessibility of cinema. So there's just an understanding there that people will know the context of this story as well, which I think a lot of films, even when they are adapted from books, don't do. Nowadays, they will rehash stuff to make sure you get it really, really clear, instead of just placing faith that you can, follow a basic story from A to Z, which is a shame.
Yes. Oh no, I'd never really thought about it that way. There would be less distractions from reading. A lot of people would be reading around about that time. So and they wouldn't have the distractions of modern life, where you're, like you say, you're presented with something, but you need to present sort of the back sort of the lore about why you're actually doing it. It's just, in a lot of cases, things are really dumbed down now because of that, and we expect it. That's the thing, we expect it to happen now. So.
Well, there is, this is an aside, but there is a sort of rumor, I don't know if it's confirmed, that Netflix have adapted their films to be like for while you're scrolling. So that's a whole other podcast though.
Yeah, there's plenty of evidence to back that up as well, like you say, but yes, let's not go there at the moment.
So the film famously reused sets from other Universal productions. You have painted castle interiors, crypts, fog-shrouded landscapes that are definitely not real, and the ship sequence as well. Universal reused footage from a silent film called The Stormbreaker. What do you think about this as a sort of, I would call it like an accidental quirk? Does it ever affect the mood of the scene that you're watching, knowing that you're not actually in a mountain? It's quite obviously a painted backdrop.
No, again, because with a lot of US films, they were shot, they were in Los Angeles for a reason. Hollywood is there for a reason, because within like 50 or 60 miles of Los Angeles, you have every conceivable outdoor set that you could possibly need. You have mountains, you have deserts, you have forests, you have oceans, everything. So everything is set within that one area. So in order to make it work and keeping budgets low, you use these techniques. And these techniques were sort of fabulous at the time. They're very well done, because a lot of people wouldn't realize that it was actually a map painting on glass. And then and it's very clever when you actually see it in action. There was a scene in Babylon, the film from a couple of years ago, and they had a big battle scene, and it was shot from the top of a hill, and it showed you how they shot it they were shooting through the glass, and the glass was up, and it was perfectly done. It's very artistic that they do it, because unless you're really looking for it, you don't see the joins, you don't, and it works very, very well. So I don't think, yes, because now we know and we're used to sort of better effects, you can kind of see the joins and things like that, and you do know when it's a set, but it still works. I think it adds to the atmosphere of it, because it keeps it sort of, it looks real. It looks real to me, and I enjoy these. I'm not looking for the joins. I'm getting immersed in the story here. And, you could say, yeah, well, they only had like a 6-foot set there where it's this grand hall and everything, but that doesn't matter. It really doesn't. I just totally invest in it, and I just revel in the way that it was sort of very ahead of the game at the time. It worked really well, and they used these sort of things, because like the real sort of Hungary where Bram Stoker had been to is nothing like what they've actually got in the film, or what he describes in the book, because it's this rocky and mountainous landscape. It's nothing like that at all. It's lush and green and everything, so it's not quite the same thing. But that doesn't matter, because it adds the atmosphere, the desolate nature of like Renfield travelling in the coach on his own and getting dropped off in the middle of nowhere, and it's all rocky, and so there's nothing there apart from the distant howl of a wolf. And it really doesn't matter, because it's building atmosphere, it's building tension, and it's drawing into the film. So I loved all that thing, and it is very much of its time. Again, with the same sort of idea as staging it like it's a play. It's very much of its time, but it doesn't take away from the film at all. It really doesn't.
I feel like in some cases, if anything, it makes it feel more sort of like fairy tale like and dream-like as well, which I like that as a layer to the story, because you're like, is this true? Because Dracula, or Vlad Tepes, or whatever his name was a real person, but this myth around him obviously is kind of exaggerated, and so I quite like that kind of dreamy sort of lens it gives to the film as well, because it does feel like a storybook at times. So I'd never thought about it in that way, but you're totally right. And the way that he influences people, it's almost like they're in this sort of fairy tale. They don't really know, they can't tell reality from the spell that they've been put under as well, because every time he does something, he says, and afterwards you will remember nothing. Oh, John, that'll give everyone a thrill. Early glamoring for the True Blood fans out there as well, because they obviously call it, as I say, being glamoured. The Lugosi's cape and medallion and formal attire have sort of become the blueprint for vampire imagery for decades. Certainly modern vampires have sort of moved away from this a little bit. But what do you think about the specific costume design has made it so culturally sticky? Like it is the definitive vampire outfit, I guess.
Yeah, it's because it's fitting in with a prince, a count, someone of noble bearing. I think that's why they would have gone for that in the first place. And the fact that he attends like formal events, like he goes to the theatre, where at that time when you went to the theatre and you went to all these things, people did dress up. And that would be the kind of, the white tie outfit would be something that someone of his bearing would wear. And he fits in with normal society in that way. Top hat, cane, cape. We think it's unusual because we don't really see people in that. When we see somebody like that, you naturally associate them with someone of the night. You don't think of it as normal outfits, because it's not the same it's less formal now when you go to
Yeah.
these things. It's, you know, you don't dress for dinner, for
Mhm.
instance, really to the same sort of extent.
They do in John's house.
Well, yeah, okay. But we don't wear white tie, you know, that kind of idea. We only culturally appropriate Mexican culture and things like that kind of idea. It was very much of the time, and it informed the audiences that this was a person who had an elevated status. And it's very clever because someone of an elevated status gets away with more. They're regarded as better people. They're regarded as a higher class. There's a scene in the film where he is waiting outside Mina's house. I think it's when when they're in London, the windows are open and he's walking along. There's a policeman there, and the policeman's like, "Oh, foggy tonight, eh, sir?" You know, and it's not, "Why are you hanging
Are you
about
skulking?
here?" Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
It's accepted because he's in higher society. So it's like almost the cape obviously covers him and things like that as well, but also masks his sort of true identity. So I think, yeah, it works really well. And it's such a startling image. That's why it's become iconic. That's why they've used it again and again and again. Obviously, they've got rid of the top hat now more because then you can see the slick back hair with the widow's peak, which is not really done in this film. The widow's peak was something that came after this.
Yeah.
But it's, again, has become quite an iconic look. I think Lugosi, when he reprised the role of Dracula, he had more of a pronounced peak about him. But it's just the high society gentleman kind of thing about it as well. You know, what I always wondered was, where do all the clothes go when he turns into a bat? You know, I could never really get my head around that.
That's fair. That's fair. And if you start off as a bat and then you change into a human or a vampire, would you not be naked?
Yes, yeah, which
Questions
wouldn't be. Questions you don't really need answers to.
And also this Dracula doesn't have fangs either as well. Like we never actually see him. Now this was obviously for code reasons, as in production code reasons. We never actually see him sink his teeth into anyone. He always pulls his cape around as well. And they also chose to sort of shorten the sequence where Renfield turns, so we don't actually see him turn, because they were worried that would have sort of like homoerotic undertones as well. But it shows you the power of, as we talked about, this eroticism of the vampires. It was so almost dangerous to show a woman or a man getting their neck bitten that was completely taken out of this film. And yet it's the thing that we most associate with vampire films. But it doesn't take away from the power of him as a character or the power of the film overall, the fact that we don't see this.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you think about it, most of the time when he is actually biting somebody's neck, it's a woman in bed wearing
sexy,
wearing their pajamas. Exactly. Yeah, it's this sort of intruder thing as well. Getting into the most private of places in order to, fulfill his, and it is a desire as well. Yes, there is obviously a big element of it is he needs blood to survive, but if that was the case, then it would just be randoms. It would be attacking out in the street, especially in the sort of foggy streets of London. It would just be running rampage there. And I know there have been films done like that, but he chooses to do it in a very dramatic way. And he takes his time about it as well. So there's all the build-up. So it is very sort of like overtly sexual in that sort of way without being it. And yet I didn't think about the neck biting thing with the fangs until afterwards, and I read about it and said, there was no fangs on display at all. And I thought, that's totally right. Yeah. It's not something, because they talk about the bites in the neck afterwards. When they're actually, investigating why Mina is feeling a wee bit under the weather, So
and as someone with very big dog teeth, I'm sad that there was no fangs, because I always feel like mine are massive. So I always like to see how they do the fang effect. So, but and also
there was a practical reason for the fangs as well, because the sort of prosthetics that they would use and actually to get the fangs in there inhibited the way they talked.
Yeah.
So
Christopher Lee has said that, because in his first Dracula appearance, he also doesn't have fangs, and it's because they were so inhibitive to him. I mean, he doesn't speak a lot in the Hammer horror films as well, but they were so inhibitive. And even in more modern times, Alexander Skarsgård has talked about in True Blood, like they would shoot the shot as if they were about to bite, stop, put the fangs in, and then continue shooting because he couldn't speak with them in either. So
Yeah.
even like in more contemporary iterations of
Yeah.
vampires, the fangs are a problem.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it makes perfect sense that they would try and avoid that because it's, as I said before, it's the infancy of talking films. So you don't want muffled language. That doesn't sell it because they still had silent films about at that time as well. So you would want it to be as clear as possible when you're actually presenting this to an audience, because you can watch a film that has a dodgy picture but clear sound, but you're less likely to watch a film that's got a clear picture and dodgy sound. That takes you out of it more, I think.
Oh yeah, and like it's funny that you've mentioned that because Universal did actually produce a silent version of the film for cinemas not equipped for sound. How do you think that would change your viewing of it? Because it would be completely stripped of Lugosi's voice, although he doesn't have loads of lines, but it would also change the sort of sound design of the film as well. How would you feel about watching it with no sound whatsoever?
It would be interesting, wouldn't it? Because you would have somebody playing an organ or something, you know, there would be music accompanying it, whereas in the sound version there is no music, and that was a conscious decision that they took because the only music you hear is at the start and there's a wee bit at the very end and during the scene at the theatre, because there is actually music playing, there's an orchestra playing, and they felt that audiences wouldn't accept music just starting in certain scenes because it's like, you know, where's it coming from? What's it about? You know, so that was just like that for a couple of years. And as you know, it was introduced gradually until Bride of Frankenstein, where they actually introduced a score, a full score all the way through it. So a silent version would have worked differently. You would have found that the performances would have been taken slightly differently as well. They were quite expressive. Obviously, Renfield and Mina and the Count himself, they would all come across very well because Lugosi came from that tradition as well. He was obviously around, so he knows how to do stage acting, which is more projection, and he does that here as well. Like you say, he doesn't speak very much, and a lot of his performance is about the way he looks, the way he stands. It's all about interpreting meaning from what he is actually doing. And yeah, he doesn't speak very much, but his presence is there most of the time. So I think it would work. It wouldn't work as well because as probably a film that if it had been made, say, 2-3 years earlier, when it was just a full silent film, you would find that a lot of the performances would be more expressive. Yeah, because they're having to get across feeling like the likes of Van Helsing and Harker. Their performances are just what you would regard as being normal sort of performances, but they would have to be far more expressive in the way, you know, you would get Van Helsing really holding up the cross and all this kind of thing. So it would be different. But yeah, I'm sure that it worked in a way, but I think it works better as a talkie. And all the interstitial cards and all that, I think that would kind of detract a wee bit from it. So you would miss something from the film that you get through language. But yeah, not sure. What do you think? No,
I feel the same way. Like, although the actors in this film are of the age where they would have been involved in silent cinema, or even like vaudeville or theatre, you know, where expressions are obviously 10 times bigger. Anyway, I think this is a film that it needs, although he doesn't, as we say, he doesn't say much, it needs that sort of commanding sort of presence. And as I've said, the accent is part of the otherness and the sexiness around that character as well. This sort of like thick burr that he has, like that, to lose that, I think it would be quite to the detriment of the film and understanding sort of who Dracula is, even just placing him sort of geographically as well. It would, you would lose that. So the original release also included an epilogue where the actor Edward Van Sloan addressed the audience directly to sort of kind of sum up what they've seen, because the film just kind of ends. I feel like it really ends quickly. So what do you like? Do you think that would have been a help to sort of early cinema going to audiences? And is this the first attempt ever at horror marketing to have one of the actors directly address the audience?
It probably is, yeah. I hadn't really thought of it in that respect. I'd read that they did that for this one and Frankenstein, I think, as well. There was an epilogue. It places a lack of faith in the audience that they're actually understanding what's going on to a certain extent.
I know, because we've just said that we thought they did place a lot of faith in the audience for the film. Yeah.
It does kind of undermine that, and it's understandable why it had been taken away, because it is kind of unnecessary. But yes, it is kind of a marketing thing as well. I do understand that. I do get that, but I think it would be slightly unnecessary, and people don't need it. I don't think they needed it. Do you think? No?
No, I don't think so. I think as a fun marketing quirk, sure, by all means, because audience, I mean, we've talked about this in the podcast as well, about how they marketed Psycho, for instance, like they weren't allowed to be late in, all that sort of thing. So it's a fun marketing quirk, maybe. But as I say, we've said this is a film that places a lot of faith in its audience throughout. So I feel like it is not really that necessary at all. But one of the strange things about this film is that there was a Spanish language film being shot at the exact same time. Basically, it was filmed at night on the same sets after the English crew had wrapped each day. And many critics actually consider the Spanish version superior in cinematography and pacing because the crew watched the English dailies and then tried to improve on them afterwards. But the lead actor, Carlos Valarius, his performance as Conde Dracula differs significantly from Lugosi's. Have you seen the Spanish language version, and what do you think about comparing the two interpretations of the film generally and of the character specifically?
I was unaware until I got the box set of the Spanish version, and the Spanish version is included as an extra on the Blu-ray disc. I think it may have been on DVD as well, and it's longer, which I found quite interesting. It's very clever because at the time they were obviously looking to open up international markets. Spanish language market is massive for cinema now, so it was obviously massive then as well. And the process of dubbing wasn't quite as advanced as it is now, and even now it's not great because obviously I'd rather watch subtitles and have something dubbed. But it made perfect sense because you were doubling down on it, and there was no crossover but really between the crews at all. I think maybe the niece, she's in both films. I think.
Yeah, it looks like her, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. I think she's in the Spanish version as well, because it's a very small part, obviously.
Yeah.
But I really liked the idea of it, and I had watched some of the extras, especially about the Spanish version. They said, they used the same sets, they watched the dailies, like you said, but they used that to expand on it. And when you watch it side by side, which I did a comparison between the two. Some of the shots are completely different. There's like it's much more adventurous. It's less static. A lot of the camera work in the English language version is very static, whereas the camera's pulling out and going to the side and making more use of the space as well. And they change certain things about it, like when Renfield is actually changed, it's actually the brides that actually do it rather than Dracula himself, because in the English version he comes in through the doors and sort of shushes them away, and they all back off and they nearly fall over each other when I don't know if you noticed that. They back off quite slowly and solemnly. And two of them are going the way they should, and the one at the front is actually going diagonally, and somebody's actually having to hold her just in shot, and they obviously thought, I think we've got away with that.
That'll
we'll
do.
So I thought if you could take Lugosi's performance and put it into the Spanish version, I think that would be a better film. But yes, the performance of Dracula is more it's more expressive, and it's the stillness about the performance that actually makes it. And it's even down to little things like he'd smaller fingers than Lugosi, because Lugosi made good use of the fingers, like
and the
with
hands,
the claws and all that. And it was very expressive that way. But when the Spanish actor was doing that, it didn't quite come across. It was a bit more sort of campy. It was still good. And
that's the word I have written down.
And the way that they shot the character as well, like I say, they had the pinpoint lights for Lugosi, and they would kind of have it wasn't like a full close in, but with the Spanish one, it was very close in all the time. And I think they reused the same look over and over. I think they just reused the same footage to give that one sort of particular type of stare, which didn't work as well as the way that, I mean, the way that they did it with Lugosi, obviously having just the band, they used that a lot in like melodramas and romantic films of the time, where the leading lady would have the band of light to highlight her eyes. And he didn't have eyes that were as expressive as Bela Lugosi's eyes. That kind of carried him through quite a lot. That they did a hell of a lot of heavy lifting in that film, whereas you didn't get that to the same extent. But I think the Spanish language version made better use of characters and developed things in certain way, and it was sexier because they wore lower cut gowns and things like stuff that wouldn't be acceptable in the English language version as well.
British Hollywood, yeah. I mean, at first I thought it was going to be like a shot-for-shot identical remake. It does kind of open that way, but as you say, the camera's a lot more fluid here. I will say that, I mean, God bless Carlos Valarius, but he is quite jug-eared as well, which takes away a certain level of sexiness, and I feel like his rictus grin and wide eyes look more comical instead of sort of like menacing, and you know, the charisma just isn't there. But I will say that the Renfield, the character of Renfield, I feel like he's far more maniacal and more dangerous in this one as well. Like they definitely went to places that they didn't go in the English language version as well. But I think if you're looking for the charisma and the power of the performance, then Lugosi wins it sort of hands down. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But there was a nice element in it as well, where when Dracula rises, he does that. You actually see him coming out of the coffin.
Yes.
And there's smoke, and then he comes out of the coffin. But you don't see that in the Lugosi version. So there's more bits to it, if you like. So that kind of added to it and made the Spanish version very, very watchable. I wasn't bored for a single minute having watched an extra 30 minutes of footage, you know. So I thought it was very clever the way that they made use of everything that had gone and sort of tried to improve on it or change it slightly. And for the most part, yes, it did work. I'm not sure about the Van Helsing character in the Spanish one. It was slightly different. He came across as being sort of professorial, but not quite the same sort of intensity. I don't know if it was just the glasses or what, you know, glasses make intellectuals seem more intellectual. I don't know.
Yeah. I think that the Van Helsing in the English language one is quite hammy as well. But it doesn't really work in the Spanish language. But I feel it's a character that they've never quite got to grips with properly. Like even like I'm thinking of like the Peter Cushing iterations and stuff like that as well. Like there's always something that's just a bit kind of like cheesy about him. But I mean, it's because partly you're wanting to root for the vampire, right? You're never going to root for the guy who's there to take him down. So before we move on, is there anything else you would like to add about your experiences watching the Todd Browning 1931 version of the film?
I was surprised a little bit at the way that it was kind of cut, but that's just modern sensibilities because it's quite jarring cuts between scenes. And like you say, it just goes end.
The end.
You know, that kind of thing. I did like the fact that when Mina is getting taken down the stairs in the Abbey, Boris Karloff just leads her and she just walks down as if a trance. But the Spanish one is actually getting carried down the stairs. And you're thinking, right, so did Boris have a bad back or what was going on there, you know? Because it's not easy to carry a person.
Latin men are more... Speaking from experience, obviously.
Well, yeah. I having said that, I wouldn't mind if Chris had tried to pick me up and sort of carry me downstairs, but I would have been quite scared.
Listen, maybe for your special birthday this year, maybe that'll be your present. Carried like a bride down the stairs, yeah.
So what about you? Did you have any sort of final wee thoughts about it?
I just think that as I say, the power of the performance is phenomenal. And I also really I feel for Renfield's ending. That always really gets to me because I think when he's begging for his life, and I find that so sad. And his death in itself is just really pathetic. Like we just see his body sort of flop down the stairs, and I just think it's such a sad end for a character who I'm always very emotionally invested in every time I watch this version of it, just because I think Dwight Frye's performance is tremendous, as we've said, but I just think his death is so very, very sad, and his begging really sort of cuts me to the core every time.
Yeah. Interestingly, in the Spanish version, Van Helsing goes to him at the very end. He goes over to the body because he's made a promise to kind of help him, because he's all during the film he says, look, we can help you, we can protect you, and obviously he's fulfilling that promise. Whereas in the English one, Van Helsing says, oh, you two go away, and she says, are you not coming with us? It's no, but he doesn't explain why he's staying there, and it's obviously to do the same thing, but you don't see that, so there's not the same connection, there's not the same compassion for somebody who's obviously very troubled and obviously been through a very sort of difficult situation. So yeah, that was an interesting wee bit as well to do with Renfield. So yes, yeah.
So now we are going to move on to Luc Besson's interpretation of the Count, almost a century on from Todd Browning's film, a testament to the appeal of leading men with a swishy cape and a mesmerising stare.
For 400 years now, we've been looking for the source.
Here you are.
He comes to find his princess.
Count Dracula. Centuries ago, I asked God for one favor. I will fight in his name, but I ask him to spare my wife. He took my princess. Tell your God that until he brings me back my wife, my life no longer belongs to him.
The plot of this high melodrama adaptation differs from the Bram Stoker novel, although Stoker, of course, is giving a writing credit on the film. Basically, the plot is when a 15th century prince denounces God after the loss of his wife, he inherits an internal curse. He becomes Dracula. Condemned to wander the centuries, he defies fate and death, guided by a single hope, to be reunited with his lost love. We have Caleb Landry Jones in the leading role, with a supporting cast that includes the likes of Christoph Waltz as the priest, Zoe Blue as Elisabetta, Ewan Abid as Jonathan, and Matilda De Angelis as Maria. So, how does Caleb Landry Jones playing Dracula reinterpret the character in comparison to Bela Lugosi?
It's almost an entirely different performance here. What they have done with this film is they have looked at the near century of performances and cherry-picked elements of it from some of the other ones. You can kind of spot what they've done here in a certain extent with the sort of very faithful Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Coppola version.
Yes.
You know, there's a certain amount of Gary Oldman in that performance.
There's a lot of Gary Oldman in this film, yeah.
And he's used the voice in a certain way, which is kind of taken elements from the Lugosi version, but it's small elements, and they've kind of taken bits and pieces from everywhere and used that in this, even up to the Luke Evans performance in Dracula Untold from about 10 years ago. It uses certain things from that, the way that the Vlad element of it as well. And they, like I say, in this film, they go into a lot of depth about the origins as well. It's not just Dracula now kind of idea, but yes, you can see where the influences are in this film.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting performance from Caleb Landry Jones, because every time I have seen him on like a red carpet or being interviewed, he comes across as extremely anxious and like a really nervous person. Whereas in this film, like, I won't lie, he's incredibly sexy. And I will go back to this notion that I feel like Bela Lugosi started the idea that vampires have to be fuckable. Like, that is a thing.
Yeah.
And Caleb Landry Jones basically takes this and runs with it. He's extremely, like, you know, romantic. He is very charming. There's a whole subplot, which we'll get onto, that talks about his power of attraction. And I just think it's a very, very strong performance, as I say, from someone who, every time I see him interviewed as himself, he seems so nervous and so uptight. Like, who knew he had this, like, big character in him? Because that's the thing, like, playing Dracula cannot be like a subtle or a small interpretation of the role. It always has to go big, and I feel like he is able to do that here, but not in a way that feels disconnected from the rest of the film. The film itself is quite over the top.
Yes, oh, it definitely is. And like you say, it has to be a big performance, and it's the sign of a very good actor that they've got that within them. They're not just mirroring what they're like in real life. So many actors are like that. If you look at sort of actors down the years, and when you only ever see their screen performances. Look at De Niro, for instance. His variety of screen performances are like all over the sort of spectrum of like sort of big and small and deep and all that. But when he was interviewed and when he was doing like publicity for films, he would be very shy and very sort of within himself. It's a famous one where he did an interview with Michael Parkinson, and it was basically one-word answers he was giving him because he just the whole thing about it. So yes, it's a sign of a good actor that they can actually sort of reach inside themselves and actually give these performances. And like you say, this film relies on a strong central performance because he's on screen maybe about 80%, 90% of the time. He's front and center, so he has to be there, and he has to exude this masculinity, this appeal, and they do that very well to begin with because like the start of the film is basically a bit of a bonk fest, you know. That's they're doing it's all food and
candles and petals,
and all this kind of stuff. All that kind of thing. You know, both people get into a big shirt, that kind of stuff. So it sets him up as being someone who has a certain amount of attraction as a person anyway. And it's like very much in the time because he's got like straggly hair and all that, but that doesn't matter because it's the essence of manliness that's about him, you know. He's very much it comes across as being quite a caring individual as well, because it's not just all about him, it's about how much he enjoys being with Elisabetta and how much she enjoys being with him, and you can see there's a bond right there as well. So that kind of sets the start, and it gives you an idea of what his drive is from then on in terms of that, and it comes across really well for that. And I was really sort of drawn into that performance right from the start because it sets everything out very nicely. You could go from there to the very last act of the film, cut out maybe like an hour and a half of it, and understand why he's doing things in the last act.
Exactly. Yeah.
Purely based on the first act, which is what it's supposed to be. So really, really impressed by it. I've seen him in other things, and he's played, like there was a film I saw him in, Nitram, and he plays this troubled young man in it, and it's really a powerful performance again. It's very, very intense. It's a low budget Australian drama. It was at Glasgow Film Festival. Oh man, it was about 7-8 years ago or something like that. But he can do that sort of thing very, very well. And of course, he was in that film with Harry Melling last year, the one about the community.
Oh, yes. Can't remember what that's called, but I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. So he was in that. So he does have range. In that film we watched last year, it's a different kind of performance again. It's more sort of internal. But I was very, very impressed with the way he was on screen on this one.
Yeah, I completely agree. The film, I feel, sort of reframes Dracula as a tragic romantic figure. And in true testament to the times that we are living in, it has become a TikTok sensation where girls in particular talk about having a man yearn for you or look at you the way Caleb Landry Jones' Dracula looks at Elizabeth. And that has become very much a trend. It's like, you know, don't settle for someone who's not going to yearn, essentially. But how did you feel like the chemistry was between the two lead actors, between Zoe Blue and Caleb Landry Jones? What did you think of their sort of dynamic and their sort of whole story arc, I guess, because that is what drives the whole film?
Yeah, like I say, during the initial sequences, you could get the chemistry between them. It was palpable. It wasn't, because sometimes when you watch love scenes, for want of a better term, it can feel a bit disconnected because you don't have the on-screen chemistry between the two leads. And here it was palpable. It worked really, really well. They knew what they were doing and they knew what they had to do in order to get that across. And it was a two-way thing. It wasn't just Caleb Landry Jones's performance. It's Zoe Blue as well. She was fantastic in this. That particularly scene. And that, like you say, that sets it up. That's your main story. It's a reframing of Dracula in a lot of ways, because we are so used to being the vampire being the seducer here, but not with this idea of it's a love bond that sort of traverses the centuries. It's quite unusual in that sort of respect. I think it has been done before, but it's not what you think of. If you say to, what do you think of, what's going to happen in a Dracula film, you'll get 9 times out of 10 it'll be somebody saying, well, he'll be doing this, and this, and it'll be standard sequence, and we've seen it all before, and then he gets a stake through the heart, but then is he really dead? That kind of thing. So yeah. Whereas it's completely different here. It's a different type of film, and at the core of it is the chemistry between the two of them. I thought it was very, very good performances to begin with.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like it's very rare that we see Dracula established in a conventional loving relationship. Exactly.
Yes.
He has it at the start of this
consensual.
film. Yeah, consensual as well, not just conventional, consensual, which is really important. But the way that they look at each other throughout this film is like, you can understand why people are like, no, I'm not settling unless you yearn like this guy, because the chemistry is unbelievable. Like, and as you say, that's a two-way street. It's not just him, it's her performance as well. And kind of similar to Lugosi, it's all in the eyes, it's all in the way they look at each other, because they're often positioned sort of across a room, whether that's or like across a street or a crowded scene. And so it's the connection that they have between these two characters, despite the distance or the people between them, I think is just gorgeous to look at. As I say, I can understand why it's become something of a trend. But more than Dracula sort of reinventing himself, the film sort of reimagines archetypes from earlier Dracula adaptations as well. So we have Van Helsing, but he's actually the priest in this one. That's all he's referred to. He's never given a name. What did you think of Christoph Waltz's performance in this role? Because he's basically hit 2 big monster movies in the past couple of years. We've been in Frankenstein and this as well.
Yeah, he is none more unsettling and sinister than he has been in anything. He has done that so well in so many different roles, obviously most recently in Frankenstein, and he's just having a fucking blast. He must be like, this is brilliant. Look what I get to do here. He's completely subtle and over the top at the same time in the way that he comes across as a priest, because you are introduced to him actually in a chapel, and he's sitting there having his lunch, because and it's something that you wouldn't aye. So it's one saying he's a very serious priest, but on the other hand, yes, he's quite unconventional as well. And Christoph Waltz just goes, just give me. He laps it up, and he can do this sort of performance without really thinking about it, but he goes all in here. He really does. He enjoys himself with this role, you can tell, and he's given enough scope in the character and in the story that he can do these things quite nicely. And it is a bit sort of kitschy at times and all that, but no, I really enjoyed it. So it's quite something when you've got a supporting performance that is right up there with the sort of lead performance as well. And he's a more conventional version of the character as well, because he's obviously buttoned down, he's older, he's grey, he's got a beard, he's more sort of holy, whereas the character of Vlad is different. He's someone who's lived for 400 years. He's changed in that time. And let's face it, Caleb Landry Jones is not a conventional leading man here. He doesn't have the...
No, but he is so attractive in this role. And I think that's why he's become this TikTok trend, is because there's something about this role that makes him really... He's so charismatic in it.
Yeah, well, in all the scenes where he's involved and with like groups of people in various European courts, he stands out. He's usually taller than everybody else, and he does not look like anybody else. They're all these beautiful people and all that. He stands out because he's totally different. And to a certain extent, Christoph Waltz does that as well. Partly to do with the fact he's always wearing black. So he's got this persona about him, and he just comes across just so well. It's a very well written character, but the performance kind of takes it up to like another stage as well. It's really good. I always look forward to seeing Christoph Waltz in pretty much anything he does.
Yeah, and I like the fact that he, although he's obviously a holy man in this, he approaches things like a sort of police detective, like he's quite forensic as far
Yeah.
as the science could go at that time. Obviously, he understands things from a faith basis, but also a scientific basis as well, which I think is quite a neat sort of framing for that character as well.
Yeah, because he's taken information from the time of Vlad actually becoming the vampire 400 years previously to where he is now. So it's a very sort of scientific approach. He's basing everything he does on fact, stuff that's been written down, accounts of what's happened. So he's built up this journal of how to battle a vampire and what to do with it and all that. And he debunks certain things as well, because he talks about garlic and he says, I'm not quite sure if that is actually accurate or not. So so there's certain things that they use what's been brought forward in terms of vampire lore from the stories and then kind of say, well, we don't know if that actually works or not, that kind of idea. And rather than just daytime, it's direct sunlight as well, which is quite a modern take on vampires, because if you look at the way that vampires have actually been portrayed recently, they use sun cream and things like that to protect them and everything. So, and that makes perfect sense. Why would you not do something like that? And that's kind of something that's been introduced there. So it's not like, you know, any time that the sun's out, even if they're in the shade, they can still get sort of burned and everything. But yeah, I thought, I mean, you can't complain when Christoph Waltz rocks up and starts speaking in that particularly Germanic accent that he has, you know.
Oh, he's so good in this. He's fantastic. One of the things that really stood out for me is the visuals and the colour palettes and the framing that goes on in this film. Luc Besson obviously is known for quite a stylized visual language, as we've seen in like The Fifth Element and Leon. What kind of stood out for you the most in this film then, in terms of, like, so as I say, just the way it looks? Because it's a very, very different film to the one we've previously discussed, not least just because it's in colour instead of black and white.
Yeah. Or they make full use of colour palettes. Everything is bright from as soon as you switch 400 years on. Like, even like sort of the early scenes are not particularly dark and gloomy and shadowy or anything like that. You know, there's a battle scene at the start and it's done during the day and it's very sort of bright and colourful. It's set during winter time, so therefore there's a natural like glare that comes off the sun when it hits the snow and everything. So you get all that, everything's in colour. And you get that again where Elisabetta is getting chased across the snowy landscape. And that's all colourful. And then 400 years later, or in the interim time, where he's visiting all the European courts of, you know, the palaces and everything, that's all beautifully lit. It's all lovely and bright, and it's colourful costumes and everything, and the way that it's all shot makes full use of the fact that it is very bright, and it's what you would expect, what we've seen in sort of melodramas and sort of period pieces. You kind of see that, so it's kind of set out like that, and it's not what you would expect from a film that's about a creature of the night. It very much goes against that. So yeah, it works very well in that way, and it explains why he can go out in daylight and attend these things.
Exactly. So, I mean, the color palette for me is like, it's so rich and jewel-like. We have like gold, scarlet, azure, emerald, silver. The women's clothing is sort of floaty and ethereal, and the men are sort of tightly wrapped in armor or uniforms quite a lot of the time. So I love the way that was all positioned. And you mentioned the battle scene. For me, one of the most striking images of the film comes right at the start, where Vlad, or the Count, he has a dragon helmet, which is just chef's kiss. And then he sets fire to the battlefield. So there's this like basically fiery cloak around him and his troops. And then they emerge as shadows against this like orange coloured smoky sky, but you can still make out his dragon head helmet. And I was like, oh my God, this is just gorgeous to look at. And I think that for vampire films, I don't know why, but we don't expect them to be so beautiful, but this is definitely a film that feels beautiful at times, and that to me is the right word, because it's stunning to look at.
Yes, you're totally right, and it kind of throws you off because you're expecting a certain type of aesthetic from a vampire film, and you're expecting a certain amount of, well, let's be frank here, a certain amount of cheese coming from the likes of Luc Besson, because yes, he does things very colourfully, but some of his output over the last decade or so has been
a bit guff.
Yeah, it's been not great. Some of it's been good, some of it's not been. But yes, so the fact that this all marries together in a way, uses all of the elements that it does, works really, really well. And it keeps you interested, because it'd be quite easy to sort of detach yourself from a film like this, because you say, oh, it's a love story. It actually says in the title, a love tale. So, what does that mean, And obviously, we do get there. But the fact that it's a sort of visual feast does not hurt at all. It keeps you really, really engaged with everything that's going on.
Yeah. The film sort of blends tone as well as style. So you've got the kind of gothic horror, you've got the romantic fantasy, but you also have moments of humour, which I will say didn't work for me at all. I feel like it really took me right out of it. Like, I'm thinking in particular when, Dracula has Harker upside down and they're like cracking jokes as he's about to slit his throat, you assume.
Yeah.
Did the tone work for you, or is this just me being like, these jokes aren't landing? It just doesn't work?
No, you're right. It didn't actually need those elements. There was enough there to sort of move the story forward and keep you engaged. And yeah, to a certain extent, I would agree with you that it did kind of take out. Thankfully, it wasn't very long, because it could have been a bit worse. And obviously, the elements around that were sort of the gargoyle figures as well.
They didn't work for me either.
Comedic a wee bit as well, in what they were doing and all the stuff that they were involved in. Initially, at the end, it was slightly different. You kind of saw their true nature and what they were.
Yeah, it took a bit of a darker turn at the end.
Yeah.
But it reminded me of, and this is really not the aim of this film, I'm sure, but it reminded me of the wisecracking gargoyles from the Disney Hunchback of Notre Dame. It really took me right out of the story, which I wanted to be immersed in. I wanted to be immersed in this love story. I was like, I really don't need like these wee gargoyles like cracking jokes and stringing people. It just didn't work at all for me, I'm afraid, which is a shame, because there's a lot of the film that does really work for me and it appeals to me, but those elements just took me right out of it.
Yeah, that and the character of Harker, he was a bit absurd in places. I thought it didn't quite work in terms of the film. It's one of the sort of weaker elements of it, I would say.
I would agree.
Because it lends itself more to comedic scenes rather than actual scenes. And I can understand what they were going for to begin with. It was similar to the sort of Renfield, the bit nervous, going up to the castle and all that. And you're kind of saying, well, it's similar, but then it changed in a lot of ways. It didn't quite work for me, which again was a bit of a shame. But yeah, it didn't fully detract from the film, but I think you're right. It did kind of take you out a wee bit. There
is a subplot in the film as well, which I feel like it could have done without, because the film is about two and a bit hours long. And the subplot I'm referring to is where he goes across Europe to create a particular perfume in order to have people sort of be drawn to him, be attracted to him, to do his bidding. I felt like that really detracted from the power of the character, because Dracula himself is supposed to be very commanding, very powerful. He has the power to attract as well, or to glamour, or to hypnotize, whatever you want to call it. What did you think of that as a subplot? To me, that whole section could have been taken out of the film.
I did kind of understand it, because yes, he does have the ability to influence people, but he was wanting to influence large numbers of people at the same time. And in order to do that, he needed more than he was able to do just through sort of natural charisma or the sort of supernatural forces that he's got. So I did understand why they were going for that, because he wanted to be reunited with his love as quickly as possible. And the shortcut towards that would be engaging as many people as possible. And obviously the whole thing behind that was he was still doing it all on his own. And he was using his perfume, which he would dab quite nicely, which kind of took me back to the No Other Choice film where they were always touching themselves in the neck.
Oh,
and things
yeah.
like that. Yeah, which has obviously had nothing to do with that. But, you know, just putting this very powerful elixir on sort of pulse points to totally command a room of hundreds of people kind of made sense to me. Yes, it did go on a little long. I could have just done that in a very sort of quick 2-minute sequence, you know, and I developed this elixir to help me in my quest. And obviously it became useless after a while, not in terms of the potency of it, but for what he was trying to achieve. It became something that he didn't feel he needed anymore. He took a different tact, and it was only there after that as a plot point, which was used like in the final act of the film, where, you know, what's that strange scent that we're, you know, he must be in the house kind of idea, that kind of thing. So yeah, it wasn't used brilliantly, but I can understand why it was used, and but obviously I can understand your point of view as well, in that it didn't really work in that kind of way.
Yeah, I felt like it just took away his power slightly. But I think with this film, you could argue that it's a film about faith, because obviously Dracula starts the film as a man of faith. You know, we see him in costume being readied for battle, and there's a bishop who he begs to keep his wife safe, and that obviously doesn't work. And then it is this emotional outburst at his faith that obviously puts the curse on him. We have the character of Van Helsing reimagined as a priest, and there's a particular sort of line that he says where he sees death as a privilege that he has been denied, and this living in hope and faith has destroyed him. And he says, I would prefer that hope kills me, which I think sort of ties into this notion of a man having lost his faith, not just in the church, but also in his faith in sort of love and community and happiness. What did you think about that as kind of one of the big sort of narrative themes that takes place in the film?
It was a bold swing. It definitely was, to change the whole creation of the vampire through faith rather than being bitten by a vampire bat or whatever, you know, that kind of idea. And framing it as a curse, I thought, was a really good interpretation of it, because then you don't need any sort of transformation. You just accept that it's a punishment from God, that you have to live eternally. And it worked really well. And obviously he was using faith to begin with as his sort of crutch for what he was doing, because he was very conflicted with the fact, you know, he's killing thousands of people.
Yeah, and he didn't want to.
Of the church. Yeah, he was more of a lover than a fighter, let's face it.
He definitely was, yeah.
So he was doing it at the behest of the church, because the church was saying, this is the one true religion. All these people over here, they're heathens. They're not. It's a false god that they worship. So by following the one true God, this is what you have to do. And this is pretty much what happened. You know, a lot of stuff that happened during the centuries was at the behest of the Catholic Church, you know, crusades, all that kind of thing. So yeah.
He says to Christoph Waltz at the end of the film, but I have killed in his name, and his name obviously refers to like God's name, and Christoph Waltz says back to him, well, man kills in his own name. And you're just like, oh, that's, there's a damning indictment of everything you've done, if ever there was one. Yeah,
nothing to do with us. Yeah. It was a different time, kind of a, you know, it was a different time, or you know, argument and everything. So yes, but yeah, I really liked the way that it was framed within a religious thing, and like I say, it carried it through. It a hatred of God, and then there was a teasing of, you know, if the vampire dies, he breaks. In traditional films, if the vampire dies, he breaks the spell of anyone that he has turned. And you saw that with Mina in the 1931 film. She suddenly goes, oh, Jonathan, I am whole again, you know, that kind of idea. Whereas in this film, it's actually going to be Vlad that's redeemed. He is, you know, getting an escape from the curse, as well as everybody else around him as well, that he has actually influenced. They will come back to normal, but it's more focused on his redemption and him actually being allowed to die, which, you know, having this in God's hands all the way through it as well is a different way of interpreting this story. It really is. It's not something that you kind of see. The vampire's just there, and he's bad. And obviously they use religious iconography, the crosses and things like that. But it's not done in the same way. It's not sort of grounded in the religious aspect, which I don't know if that actually comes from the book or what, if there's a religious aspect to that.
The tropes are certainly mentioned in the book, but again, I think this comes back to almost what Eggers picked up on in his version of Nosferatu, is that the setting of the Dracula character, where he is geographically, bizarrely in this film, Romania and France are right next door to each other, which don't know what map Luc Besson has, but there's this notion that like Eastern European like pagan practices were so othered, and he was so like rooted in that the only thing that could kill him would be a good Christian. Like, so it takes it back to like the context of the time of when it was written, this notion that Christianity was the prevailing religion, and it sort of overpowered these people who weren't, or and as I say, they became sort of other. So, but what I like about this film is it's not just about like religious faith as well. It's about this faith in love, this faith in finding redemption, this faith in finding each other. And it's, they always say it's the hope that's the killer. And that really is what happens to him in this film, is he loses his faith, not just in the religious institute that he was brought up in, but in humanity generally, because he's seen it at its worst over the past 400 years.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It makes good use of the fact that he's been around for 400 years. It really does, because it informs he's not an unintelligent man. He knows what's happening. He knows what he's doing. And yes, it is obviously to an end, which seems like an obsession, but he's clever. He knows what he's doing. He was in a position where he tried for so long and then realized that he could not do it himself. So he's very aware of his own fallibility at the same time, and the fact that there's a scene in the French court where he ends up, and he realizes at that point that what he's trying to do, because he meets somebody who looks a wee bit like her,
and she laughs at him. It's awful.
So at that point, that's where he changed tack completely. He decides that he's going to have to take himself away from it, and he's going to have an army of people who are going to look for his lost love. And I like that idea, because it could take centuries to do it. It could take years to do it, but he's creating undead that will do that for him. So and obviously that's where sort of the modern vampire comes from, as in the community of vampires, and how it starts from a single source, and he is deemed to be the single source, rather than some ancient being from 2,000 years ago that kills him and all that. So yes, I really did enjoy that. I thought it was clever the way they did it as well, and it's not something that I was actually expecting. So bonus.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I like that, as you say, I like the way he sets up his own community. I think that's really, really clever. So in contrast to the 1931 film, which uses a lot of, as I say, like painted backdrops and stuff like that, the sets and locations here appear to be like shooting in Paris, in particular locations. Did you feel like the sets kind of contributed to sort of like grounding the story, making it more credible? Because it's a very lavish production here, and there's obviously a lot more budget behind it than perhaps the Todd Browning version. Did you think that helped sort of like immerse you in the story? Like I'm thinking in particular, like there's a lovely shot of like Florence where we sort of get taken through a window, like through over the Arno river and stuff like that. Like I feel again, it added a sort of like fairy tale like version or like layer to it, because it was just so lavish and so over the top.
Yes, it was very sort of clever that they used the end of the 19th century as the setting for because it could quite easily have tried to make it sort of modern day. But there's a certain amount of glamour and, like say, fairy tale, having it at that sort of period, because then you're still getting people wearing bigger costumes. There's more formality about how they do things. And spectacles are bigger in some way because they're slightly newer. Like there's a whole final hour of it is based around Paris, and they're celebrating Bastille Day. Basically, it's like I think it's like 200 years, they say, after Bastille. So it must be like 1876 or something around about that. So you don't have very many modern elements to it. There are no vehicles. Everything's still it's like gaslighting and all this.
Yeah.
It kind of fits in that way very nicely, and there's still a certain amount of grandeur to high society living and everything. And they showed that time and again by having all these sort of elements that it was like the Grand Hotel, and you would see out into like Paris in the evening and all that, and you're thinking, yes, they're making very good use of the time period and obviously the setting as well, because Paris is known as being like the city of lovers, that kind of idea. So that's feeding into all that as well. That's where he meets her again, and just how it all kind of works its magic in there as well. And it works because of that. And then the sort of opposite side of that is where the priest and the doctor have the vampire chained up. And that's typical pre-20th century, almost like lunatic asylum. You've got all these madmen who are like feeding each other and just being unhinged, if you like. Lining the corridor of where they are going all the time and all that. And that's very much of the period, and it kind of like sort of soaks you in. And it's the same idea of like, there's the glamour, but the other side of that, and it's a very Victorian thing, is you hide away your shame. You keep these people away, locked away. You never see them. They're not encouraged in polite society. Any sort of deviation from the norm is not acceptable. They have to be hidden away. It even goes to the same extent of like when young girls get pregnant and they'd be shipped away to Ireland, to cousins in Ireland and that kind of thing for like 6 months until they had the child, and then all this kind of thing. So it feeds very much into that, and I thought it worked wonderfully. It's really nice.
The asylum scenes in particular, there's two elements that I loved. I loved the scene where Vlad walks down the corridor and they all stop, and almost like it's like they're obeying him. They just kind of turn slightly. But I also love when we first meet the character of Maria and she's sprawled out on the floor and the chains almost look like a pentagram, the way that they've been scattered across, but they're on her white wedding dress. So it's like a really beautiful like image to look at. And it's the costume that I think that really makes this film as well. Now, we talked about obviously how Bela Lugosi's, Top and Tails has kind of defined the vampire character. I think it's fair to say that this is one of the more elaborately dressed versions of Dracula that we've seen as well, plus the costuming all around him. We see his love dressed basically in what I would call like Virgin Mary blue. You can tell I went to a Catholic school. Whereas Maria, the vampire that he's turned, is in like reds and blacks, obviously to signify like a very different lifestyle. What did you think of the costumes in general and that sort of aesthetic that it lended to the film?
Yeah, it was very much fitting in with the period, but it used costume in the same way that the 1931 used it. Obviously, the 31 version was set round about that time, so it was a couple of decades after the setting of this film. So he was very elegant, he was very well dressed, he was poised, and the costuming helped with his portrayal as well, because he had a certain grandeur about him. He stood out. And I really liked the introduction of Maria, because that happened when he started turning people at the French royal court, and he bit her in the neck and her wig fell off, and this expanse
that was red gorgeous
hair tumbled down, and it was such a good thing. And like you say, they used her particularly well, because when you meet her at first, she's wearing white but this flame red hair, and she was somebody who was very exuberant in the way she conducted herself, and her costume really helped with that, because it was always lavish. She was always a standout presence within sort of any group that she was in as well, and it just worked so well. Obviously, an awful lot of thought had been put into how they looked, and with all the sort of elaborate costuming that was there, they still managed to make these sort of principles stand out in a way. Like you say, the light blue costume with the small hat, and the way that he was very, very. It was attention to detail. The way he was dressed. The way that Vlad was dressed, it obviously cost a lot of money, and you knew that he had money from a sequence that was previous when all the gargoyles were all collecting all the money and putting it on the table for him. So they knew that he had this behind him, and he obviously had like hundreds of years of observing etiquette, so he knew what he was doing. Even then, he'd been out of the game for, you've got to assume it's about 200 years that he had decided that he was going to take a step back and go and live. And when you see him at first, he's got the long white hair and these like bunches. I find it that I can't really describe how it's very sort of Gary Oldman Dracula.
Yeah, he's borrowed. I said to Chris, he's borrowed Gary Oldman's set of curlers, because it's that kind of victory roll type of sweep that he's got, but then there's like threads of it kind of dangling down that just look really unkempt. And of course, he's in the red, sort of like long kind of cloak when we meet him as well. So definitely borrowed very heavily from that particular aesthetic, but in a way that kind of made me chuckle when I got over it. Like I wasn't sitting there going, "Oh, this is annoying me," this is a direct rip-off or whatever. Like I think that by the time he gets to Mina and they go to that sort of like kind of fun fair thing, he's in black and aubergine as well, which is like such a striking combination, and especially on like a man of his frame as well. And he does have the top hat and the cane, and it's very elaborate. But I love a bustle, and I'm a sucker for like tulle and silk, and that this film has that in abundance as well. One of the other things that I think just makes it that bit more sort of like magical is the score, which obviously plays a major role in shaping the kind of romantic tone of the film. What did you think of it in terms of like supporting the emotional beats? Because I feel like it definitely leans towards sweeping romance as opposed to like typical horror.
Yeah, it's more a score that you would associate with a melodrama or a love story or something like that. It's, for the majority of it, it's in waltz time as well. So even when the music box is playing, it's waltzes, and you associate waltzes with glamour and these sort of big society events and things like that, and people dancing, and it's more jaunty, a waltz, like a sort of 3/4 beat is you're more inclined to go along with something like that. You're going dum 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 dum, this sort of stuff. So yes, it really sort of plays into the fact that this is trying to be a different type of Dracula film. It's not going to be totally dark and everything. It's backing up what it says in the title. It's a love tale. That's the central element of this. So therefore the score is going to basically follow that. And it's sumptuous. It's, big orchestrations and everything as well. Yeah, works very well in this context. It really does. Works with the colours, like you say as well.
Yeah, that's the perfect word for it, is sumptuous. I love that. I feel like the issue I have with this film is because I did enjoy it, but I felt it was a little bit too long, and there was some, as I say, tone stuff that didn't work for me. Yeah. But what it does have in common with the first film is that it just kind of ends. Like this film has like basically some candles get blown out, and Christoph Waltz's character literally says, "The spell is broken, everything is fine now," which I thought was a bit bizarre because I felt like we were building up to something that never quite got there. What did you think of the ending of this film?
Yeah, they made a conscious choice here not to go down the route of having some bloodbath ending. To a certain, I know there was to a certain extent, because he was like, all the soldiers had come to the castle and he killed multiple soldiers, and that was a really good sequence actually, because
his fight sequences were great.
Yeah, they were really good. And then, but all during those sequences, the priest was just standing there with his back to everybody. And he knew that his argument would be enough to quell the ire of the vampire. He knew what the outcome was going to be. So by not really showing that, by having this final sequence where you're, seeing what you expect to see, I think it kind of worked. Yes, it was slightly abrupt. And then he just said, auf Wiedersehen, work's all done here, and he walked out of the castle. But yes, I can understand why they did it that way, because it might have taken away from the fact that this isn't a total vampire story, it's a love story. So he'd kind of come to accept what he had to do in order, and when it was explained to him what he had to do in order to provide a future for his one true love, then that's what he did, which I do kind of get, But I take it you felt slightly otherwise?
I just felt like it sort of ended out of nowhere. I guess I was expecting a little bit more in terms of like an emotional resolution as well, which I felt like I didn't really get out of this film. Like it all gets very, very wild in the third act. Like there's, beheadings, there's cannon fire, there's, fighting, and then there's like this really obviously intense one-to-one between the priest and Dracula himself in the castle. But I don't know, I guess I was hoping for something a bit more, or rather a bit less final. I guess that's what it was. I think I was expecting, because their love story is so prominent and so powerful throughout, and I understand that he was making a sacrifice, but yeah, I just felt a wee bit cheated that it was just like, well, everything's fine now, and she's obviously supposed to go back and live her life with no knowledge, I assume, of this great love affair that spanned 400 years. So I did feel a little bit cheated on the sort of emotional impact of it all, I think.
Well, I took from that she is basically the reincarnation of Elizabeth, and because she has memories, so she's not going to be able to go back to the life she had. Now, whether she stays in the castle and gets all the gargoyles the gargoyles are no longer there either. Yeah, of course. And quite unsettlingly, they're all children.
Yeah, that was really like, as much as, do you know what though? It would have been so much more effective as a film if they hadn't used gargoyles straight, if it had just been those like weird little bald kids. That would have been way more unsettling, whereas the gargoyle kind of humour sort of, as I say, that kind of took me out of it a little bit. But yeah, I don't know what the future holds for her as a character, and that's what I felt a bit disappointed in, I guess.
Yeah. Well, she gets to live a life, which is something that, she there's a certain amount of closure, because she always says that she felt as if there was something missing from her life, some element of it that just didn't feel right. Obviously, she was engaged to be married and everything, but that was more of a convenience thing more than anything else. She didn't love him, but now she's actually figured out why she had those feelings. And yes, obviously, it may or may not end well, but at least she has some form of closure there as well, which does kind of, yes, it is kind of an ending. It is kind of a finality to it. And I did kind of get that, but yes, I understand what you're saying, in that it was a wee bit abrupt. But yes.
That's what I'm saying. We could have done without that perfume montage, and I would have rather had more information towards the end of the film. So as I said at the before we started talking about this film, it's almost a century on from Todd Browning's Dracula. How do you feel the character has evolved over that span of time, and which, if any, sort of iteration of Dracula stands out to you as being the most memorable?
This is an almost unrecognisable version of Dracula, I would say, from the original one, and that you can sort of chart the progress through the decades of Dracula being on screen. And I must think at this point there must be hundreds of them. You're probably better informed than I am, having been on the Vampire Videos podcast.
There's a very bad Jerry Butler adaptation that I'll never forgive the boys for making me sit through. But yes, there's certainly lots that exist. I mean, when you think about like the Hammer output, for example, loads. So yeah, so it's really changed over the years, and that's through necessity, because you can only tell the same story so many times without sort of diminishing returns. You need to add something, you need to change something, and that may be, like in this case, it's like the origin of Dracula has been told in a way that we've seen a few times as well, but there's a slight difference to it. So it's like comparing apples and bicycles. It's not even in the same, the name is the same, but the character is completely different. There are elements within the original film that just fit very well. So I would not degrade that based on seeing newer versions of it. It is what it is. It's the sort of the Dracula Year Zero, if you like. That's the origin of it, from which everything else has come. So the fact that it's such a rich character that it can be done so many times in so many ways. I mean, it must be at least one or two Dracula films you get a year at this point. I mean, easy if you think about like different. I mean, even if you count Nosferatu, for example, which is a Dracula ripoff. Like that's definitely one of the iterations. But for me, I just think it's interesting how the character still has universal appeal. Like some of my favorite Draculas are, I love the original Christopher Lee Dracula because again, there's a power to, because he doesn't really say much. I loved the Clay's Bang adaptation that the BBC did as well. He was a very sort of like, you know, he's obviously gorgeous. So it's a kind of sexualized version of a vampire. But I'm fascinated by the fact that we just keep coming back to this story. Now, I'm sure I remember a random fact from my film studies lecturers back in the day that said basically every time we have an economic recession, vampire movies come out at the cinema because we love losing ourselves in these sort of stories that are sexual and other and, you know, fantasy driven and violent as well. But yeah, the vampire myth in itself, no matter what vampire film you're watching, you'll be watching something that has, as you've said, the rules that were laid out in the 1931 version of what is shown or not shown on screen in terms of how a vampire moves and interacts and how they exist. And I just find it fascinating that they were all still quite obsessed. And Dracula's not really one of the scarier ones either in terms of sort of movie monsters. He's definitely become more sexual than scary. But I think the enduring appeal will always be there. I think we'll always have a Dracula movie.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's plenty of scope for doing it time and time again. I mean, look at the Underworld films, for instance. That's definitely sexy vampires. You know, wearing like tight leather and shooting ultraviolet bullets and all this kind of thing. You know, so yeah, there's so many ways you can do it, and it has been done in so many ways. But there's still scope for surprising you. It really is, and that I think Dracula Love Tale kind of emphasizes that there is still life in the Count yet.
Oh, I love that. That has to be the little tag at the top of the show. I love that. Is there anything else you'd like to add about either of the films?
Just the scene that I briefly mentioned earlier, where there are 3 people chasing Elisabetta across an open tract of snowy field, but there are traps there. There are bear traps in the snow, and it's such a clever idea, and it's a very visual thing as well, because these traps you can't see them because they're underneath the snow, and it's obviously they're all on horseback, and it's the way that develops as well, and how they get caught, and how it all plays into this very brutal fight scene and informs the rest of the film as well. I thought that was a stunning sequence. I really, really enjoyed that.
I would agree. The drama of her costume against the snow in itself was just, it's so fantastic. I like I said, I'm just fascinated by the fact that, you know, these films that started almost a century ago are still inspiring new iterations now. And I think that's testament to the power of cinema as well, that we still want these films, we still want to see them, we still want to feel them as well, which I think is really important in the Dracula lore in particular, is that the feeling that it gives you. So yeah, I'm just 100 years from now, there will be a podcast still talking about vampire films and Dracula in particular. I have no doubt.
Oh yeah, I have no doubt at all that will still be the case. We will probably, when we do the 50th anniversary podcast, we'll probably be talking about you know, me from the hospital bed in the mental ward. I will still be talking about vampire films. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm definitely headed for a good old Victorian asylum. None of this contemporary treatment nonsense. I need a dark cell. Well, that is everything from us on this first very special episode of the Moviescramble podcast, which forms part of our Universal Monsters box set. So look out for more movie monsters to come. As always, you can find us across all the usual social channels, including Blue Sky and Instagram. And you can drop us an email, podcasts@moviescramble.co.uk. And if you've really liked what you've heard, we'd love it if you could leave a fantastic review. Sorry, I had to get one vampire pun in there on the podcast platform of your choice. But until next time, it is bye from me. Bye.
Goodbye.
Oh, I love that.